summer of 1972, deep in the American South. The heat clung heavy to the back roads, carrying with it the scent of gasoline and dust. At a lonely gas station, the calm was shattered by the roar of motorcycles. A pack of leather-clad bikers circled an old farmer, his jeans worn thin, his hat tilted low, a sack of feed clutched desperately in his hands. Their laughter was sharp, cruel. Every shove against his frail body was less a prank than a ritual of humiliation. From the distance, a Cadillac slowed. Behind the wheel sat Elvis Presley. He had slipped away from his entourage after a small-town concert, chasing solitude on the open road. But what he saw pulled him from his world of music and flashing lights into a darker, more ordinary violence. He hesitated for a heartbeat. He knew the risks. Headlines could twist anything into scandal, and a single wrong move could shadow his name. Yet the sight gnawed at him. A man cornered, dignity stripped away, while others watched and did nothing. The door of the Cadillac creaked open. Boots touched the gravel. The king of rock and roll stepped out, not onto a stage, not into spotlight, but into a moment where his fame meant nothing, and his choices would mean everything. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. Dust swirled lazily across the narrow road, stirred by the fading heat of late afternoon. A single Cadillac slowed to a crawl near the edge of a country filling station. The vehicle was immaculate but understated, its glossy paint dulled by the thin coat of dust it had collected from the back roads of Tennessee. The driver's door opened with an easy motion, and a tall man stepped out, smoothing the creases of his simple shirt. His hair was neatly combed back, dark as a raven's wing, but it was his glasses, thick, tinted, the kind that shielded more than the eyes, that drew attention first. The men leaning on their motorcycles didn't bother to stand. They had been circling the lone farmer for some time, voices carrying a harsh edge that only half disguised the pleasure they took in humiliating him. Their leather jackets bore no polished insignia, just crude patches, and their laughter smelled of cheap beer and arrogance. To them, the newcomer was nothing but another passerby, some city slicker who had wandered too far down the wrong stretch of highway. They sized him up quickly. Ordinary shirt, worn boots, no entourage, no sign of power. Just another face. One of the bikers, a thick-set man with scars crawling down his forearm, leaned forward and spat into the dirt. "Not your business, friend," he said flatly, eyes narrowing. "Best keep moving." The farmer, still on his knees from the last shove, looked up. His face was gaunt from work and worry, his hands cracked and raw. For a fleeting second, his eyes found the stranger's. They carried a quiet plea, the kind a man gives when he's run out of ways to fight, but still can't bring himself to surrender. Yet the farmer said nothing. Pride, fear, both tied his tongue. The tall man adjusted his glasses, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, voice even, but carrying a resonance that didn't need volume. "See, son," he said slowly, "my business is anywhere I see wrong being done." The words cut through the afternoon air with a weight that startled even the farmer. Something in the tone was unmistakable, an authority not demanded but lived. The bikers didn't flinch at first. A couple chuckled, the sound low and derisive. Yet their laughter faltered when one of them, a younger man with restless eyes, tilted his head and squinted. Recognition flickered, faint but unmistakable. His hand twitched against the handlebar of his Harley. Silence fell, not complete, but heavy enough that even the chirp of cicadas seemed to recede. For the first time, unease passed among them like a hidden current. The leader, broader than the rest, sensed it instantly. His pride stiffened. If this man was who they suspected, backing down now would mean humiliation before his own crew. He could not allow recognition, fame, adoration, the shine of celebrity, to undermine his rule here. This was his arena, a forgotten roadside in a forgotten town, where brute force still carried more weight than any gold record. He stepped forward, shoulders squared, jaw clenched. With exaggerated casualness, he shoved the farmer again, forcing him face first into the dust. It was an act of defiance, a statement to the others. Not even the appearance of greatness would change who called the shots here. The farmer let out a stifled grunt, but he didn't cry out. Instead, his gaze lifted once more toward the stranger, torn between fear of dragging him deeper into danger and a desperate hope that someone, anyone, might finally intervene. His lips trembled, but the words never came. Around them, the air thickened with unspoken tension. The other bikers waited, some uneasy, some smirking, all measuring what would happen next. The farmer's silence, the stranger's composure, the leader's show of dominance. Each beat fell into place like notes in a song, building toward a crescendo. And through it all, the man in the glasses stood still, shoulders squared against the hostile circle. His fame meant nothing here. No cameras, no stage lights, no screaming crowd. Only the gravel under his boots, the smell of gasoline in the air, and the raw fact that in this patch of dust, power belonged to those willing to wield fear. Yet he did not step back. The farmer struggled to his feet, brushing dust from his faded shirt with trembling hands. Before he could fully steady himself, the man in the glasses stepped forward and reached out, not hurriedly, but with a deliberate calm. He clasped the farmer's elbow, lifted him upright, and held him there for a moment as though transferring some of his own steadiness into the older man's frame. The gesture was simple, but in its gentleness lay a defiance more potent than fists. The bikers watched, arms folded, lips curling with uneasy smirks. Their leader's face tightened. He had expected fear, maybe stammered apologies, but not this kind of composed interference. It was the calmness that unsettled them. Anyone could shout back, anyone could swing a fist, but to answer provocation with poise, that carried a weight they didn't quite know how to counter. The stranger addressed them then, not loudly, but with the kind of tone that seemed to carry farther than it should. His words didn't echo. They settled like stones dropped into a pond. "You boys ever wonder," he asked, his accent soft but edged, "why a man feels big only when someone else is on the ground?" A few of them snorted. One muttered something about preacher talk. Yet no one stepped closer. The weight of the voice was undeniable. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being listened to, someone who did not need to raise it to be heard. The farmer glanced at him, disbelief mingled with awe. He recognized it, that cadence, that rhythm, but the thought was too wild to accept. What would a man like that be doing out here, at this forgotten stop? His heart pounded with a mixture of fear and dawning hope. The bikers tried to shake it off. One of them, younger but cocky, jabbed a finger in the stranger's direction. "Anybody can put on shades and talk smooth. Don't mean you're somebody. You could be playing a part, for all we know." A ripple of laughter followed, but it lacked conviction. The farmer, now on his feet, clutched his hat against his chest. His eyes darted from the gang to the man beside him. He seemed caught between terror that this could spiral into violence and the wild possibility that he was witnessing something unreal. The man in the glasses exhaled softly, then slid them from his face. The motion alone was disarming. Suddenly, the barrier was gone. and his eyes, sharp, weary, unmistakably alive, met the biker's. For a beat, the moment stretched. Then, in a voice quieter than the wind moving across the fields, he let a line slip past his lips. It was not a speech, not a performance. Just a few bars, hummed low, of a melody that every jukebox in America had carried. Notes wrapped in velvet, intimate yet commanding. The effect was immediate. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. One biker's smirk faltered. Another swallowed hard. Even the farmer's knees nearly buckled, not from exhaustion now, but from the shock of hearing a sound that had once lifted him through long winters. His chest constricted, eyes burning with tears he had not expected. For those few seconds, the rough edges of the place, the cracked pavement, the smell of gasoline, the sneers fell away. The music stripped it bare, leaving only silence thick with recognition. But silence could be dangerous. The leader felt it slipping. Authority, respect, the fragile fear that held his gang together. He could not let the spell settle. With a sneer, he barked, "So you can sing. That don't mean you walk in here and tell us how to live. Fame don't buy you a say in our business." His hand tightened into a fist. His face flushed red, not only from rage, but from panic at the eyes of his own men shifting, questioning. He raised his arm, ready to bring it down, not on the farmer this time, but directly on the man who dared to undermine him. The farmer gasped, torn between wanting to shout a warning and being too paralyzed to speak. Every nerve in his body screamed that this was the moment when the fragile balance would break. His breath hitched, half in terror, half in a desperate hope that the man beside him would not retreat. The stranger didn't flinch. He stood his ground, the faint trace of the song still hanging in the air, his eyes fixed not on the leader's fist, but on the younger bikers whose faces were betraying doubt. His posture, his composure, even the slight tilt of his head carried a message louder than any challenge. "You cannot shake me." The seconds stretched, each one sharper than the last. The farmer felt sweat trickle down his back, despite the fading heat. He could sense something shifting, an unseen struggle not of fists, but of wills. The bikers had walked into this encounter expecting dominance, and now they found themselves staring into a presence they couldn't easily define, one that tugged at their loyalty and pried open the cracks in their bravado. The leader's fist hovered, trembling with the weight of his pride, and still the man in front of him remained steady, waiting, pressing without moving an inch. The farmer, heart hammering, realized something he had never felt before. For the first time in years, he was not standing alone. The raised fist hung in the air, trembling not from weakness, but from the burden of hesitation. A single heartbeat could have tipped it forward into violence. Dust clung to the fading light, a haze of golden specks swirling around boots and chrome. The filling station's old neon sign buzzed faintly in the background, its glow too feeble to cut through the tension pressing down on everyone present. No bodyguards were here, no stagehands, no managers, no loyal entourage ready to close ranks. For once, he was just a man standing alone, with nothing between himself and the blow but his own resolve. He knew the risk. One injury, broken jaw, cut lip, would not remain a private matter. Headlines had a way of twisting everything. Singer caught in roadside brawl. The shame, the gossip, the opportunists waiting to carve him down. Yet none of that pulled him back. Instead, he leaned forward, not aggressively, not recklessly, but with a deliberate step that shortened the space between him and the leader. The shift was subtle, but in that kind of standoff, it was thunder. The invisible line of territory had been crossed. The bikers stirred. A few straightened, hands twitching at belts or jackets. They read the step as defiance, and their leader's pride flared with it. His eyes narrowed, and for a fraction of a second, the blow seemed inevitable. Then something happened that no one expected. From behind the line of leather and metal, a voice cracked through, not deep and commanding, but uncertain, even nervous. "Hold on," the voice said. It came from one of the younger riders. He looked barely out of his teens, his jacket oversized, his beard more suggestion than fact. He moved forward a little, just enough for everyone to see the conflict on his face. His eyes darted between the man in the glasses and his own leader, as though torn between awe and loyalty. "That's him," he said softly, but in the silence it carried. "That's really him. What are we even doing?" The words didn't land like a declaration. They slipped out like an accidental truth. But once spoken, they couldn't be recalled. The circle shifted. A couple of bikers glanced at each other, doubt clouding their swagger. The leader's jaw tightened, fury flashing in his eyes. He shoved the young one back with a rough hand, spitting curses. "You keep your mouth shut," he barked, voice harsh enough to rattle. "Don't you dare go soft now." The boy stumbled, but didn't retreat completely. His hesitation lingered, and the doubt he had planted rippled through the group. The man in the glasses saw it, sensed it, like a draft in a sealed room. He knew the weight of a single crack in loyalty. He turned his attention, not to the furious leader, but to the boy. His gaze locked on him, and when he spoke, his words seemed meant only for him, though everyone could hear. "You already know the truth," he said, low and steady. "Don't hide it. Not from yourself." The boy froze, lips parting as though to reply, but no sound coming. Something in his eyes betrayed shame, or maybe relief, as if he'd been waiting for permission to say what he felt. The leader cursed again, louder this time, trying to drown out the moment. He shoved another man in frustration, demanding unity. But unity was slipping, and he could feel it. The farmer, standing just behind, clutched his hat to his chest so tightly his knuckles blanched. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. This wasn't brute force. It wasn't fists or knives. It was something invisible, more dangerous in its own way. The stranger wasn't fighting with strength. He was unraveling them with presence, with words, with a quiet certainty that made fists feel small. The air thickened until every breath felt heavy. The younger bikers shuffled, caught between loyalty to their leader and the gnawing pull of conscience. They hadn't expected their night's entertainment to turn into a reckoning. The leader's face darkened. His authority, built on fear and swagger, was slipping like sand through fingers. Every second that passed without obedience was a threat. He barked again, shouting insults, puffing his chest, trying to drown the quiet voice of doubt with volume. But the stranger didn't move. He stayed close, steady as a stone in the current. His voice didn't rise, didn't match the anger. It simply cut through it like a knife through cloth. "You're not angry at me," he said, eyes never leaving the leader's. "You're angry at the thought that you might lose them, that they're starting to see through you." The words landed with surgical precision. A couple of the bikers shifted uneasily, their expressions betraying cracks of truth. The young one's jaw clenched, torn but no longer silent inside. The farmer could hardly breathe. He had thought he'd be beaten to the ground again, maybe worse. Instead, he was watching a battle without fists, a war waged with nothing but conviction. It felt as though one more second, just one more word, one more glance, could either ignite a fight or break the gang apart from within. The air itself trembled, waiting. The silence shattered when the leader lunged forward, seizing the farmer by the collar. The fabric bunched in his fist, jerking the older man off balance. Dust puffed up around their boots as the farmer staggered, choking on the sudden grip. The others stirred, a low growl of approval rising in their throats, but it was nervous rather than joyful, as though they too were testing whether their leader still held command. Before the blow could fall, the man in the simple shirt moved between them. Not fast, he did not shove, did not swing, but with the steady certainty of someone who refused to allow the next act of cruelty to happen under his watch. His presence created a wall stronger than fists. The leader's arm halted in midair, blocked by nothing more than a gaze that refused to yield. The farmer gasped, clutching at his chest. His eyes darted upward, disbelief plain, as he realized he was no longer alone in his humiliation. His voice cracked, unsteady. "Please, no more." And then, to everyone's surprise, the young biker who had spoken earlier stepped forward again. His voice quavered, but his words carried enough force to slice through the tense air. "We didn't come here to rough up some old man. This ain't what we're supposed to be about. It's wrong." The words hung there, raw and unpolished, but heavy nonetheless. Two other bikers shifted, exchanging uncertain glances. One muttered under his breath, "Kid's got a point." Another spat into the dirt, but didn't step forward. The unity of the group wavered, fragile as thin glass under a boot heel. The leader snapped his head around, glaring at them like a cornered animal. "You side with him? Over me?" His voice cracked with rage. "We stick together, or we're nothing. Don't you forget who made you part of this." But the crack had widened. The younger one shook his head, his courage trembling but real. "Sticking together don't mean beating down folks that can't fight back. You think that makes us strong? Makes us men?" The words struck harder than a punch. Two bikers murmured their agreement, edging slightly away from their leader. The others shifted uneasily, caught between fear of him and the shame of the truth. The man in the glasses seized the moment. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but every syllable landed with weight. "You want to know what strength is? It isn't about how many men you can scare, or how many times you can push someone smaller into the dirt. Strength is what you show when you stand up for someone who can't stand for himself." The line cut deep, not just for the boy, but for every rider who had once believed this gang gave him belonging. Their leader's authority had always rested on swagger and threat, but now a different kind of authority was in the air, the kind that came from conviction, from a life lived under the eyes of millions and yet carried without arrogance. The farmer wiped dust from his face, his lips trembling as if he might cry. He had not heard words like that spoken on his behalf in years. He straightened slightly, dignity returning even as bruises blossomed on his skin. The leader, though, felt his grip on the group slipping like oil through his hands. His face flushed crimson, a bead of sweat tracing his temple despite the cooling air. He barked at his men, louder, angrier, desperate to restore control. "Don't listen to this city boy. He don't know nothing about us. He don't run this crew. I do." But already his volume betrayed him. Leaders who had to shout were leaders losing their hold. The bikers knew it, even if they wouldn't admit it out loud. Some looked down at their boots, unwilling to meet his eyes. The boy straightened a little, no longer shrinking back. The man in the glasses took another slow step closer, narrowing the space once more. His expression was calm, but the set of his jaw left no doubt that he would not retreat. He spoke softly, and the softness was more terrifying to the leader than any scream. "They're not afraid of me," he said. "They're afraid of what they'll see in themselves if they keep following you." For a moment, The gang looked less like a pack of wolves and more like men caught between two mirrors, one reflecting who they thought they were, the other reflecting who they had become. The farmer whispered under his breath, almost too quiet to hear, "Lord, help us." But for the first time, there was something else in his voice. Hope. The leader's chest rose and fell in harsh bursts. He could feel his grip slipping, his authority being stolen not by fists or blades, but by words. He clenched his teeth until his jaw ached, glaring at the man who had dared to expose him before his own men. And with every second that passed, his desperation grew. Around them, the dust settled, the cicadas hummed, and the faint buzz of the neon sign pressed into the silence like a reminder that the world was still turning, that time was not on his side. The leader's chest heaved, his hand curling into a fist once more. His authority was bleeding out, and he knew it. He needed one decisive act to reclaim it, something raw, physical, unquestionable. His eyes burned, his lips peeled back in a snarl, and he lifted his arm high, preparing to strike. The farmer squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the blow. The young biker tensed as though ready to intervene but too afraid to commit. The others shifted uneasily, torn between the loyalty they had sworn and the weight of doubt pressing harder with every heartbeat. And then, just as the strike seemed certain, something unexpected broke the air. Not a shout, not a block, a sound. It was a thread of melody, so quiet at first it might have been mistaken for the wind. But it carried, weaving through the tension with an uncanny clarity. The man in the plain shirt, still standing firm, had opened his mouth, not to argue, not to threaten, but to sing. The words were hushed, almost a whisper, yet heavy with sorrow. As the snow flies. The melody of In the Ghetto floated into the dusty twilight. It wasn't a performance. There was no flourish, no raised voice, no attempt to entertain. It was bare, unguarded, more prayer than song. The leader froze mid-swing. His fist hovered in the air, the rage in his eyes colliding with something he hadn't expected. Beauty, grief, humanity in its rawest form. The notes struck against the armor he wore like hammer against glass. Around him, the pack stilled. The young biker's mouth parted, disbelief etched across his face. Two others lowered their arms. Even the farmer, beaten and trembling, felt his chest clench so sharply he forgot to breathe. For years he had heard that voice only through radios and jukeboxes, filtered and distant. To hear it here, within arm's reach, unadorned by instruments, was like being touched by something larger than life. His knees nearly gave out again, not from pain this time, but from awe. The melody lingered in the air, and the silence it created was profound. No one moved. No engine roared. Even the insects seemed to falter, as though creation itself had stopped to listen. Two bikers exchanged a look, shook their heads, and stepped back. Without a word, they turned toward their motorcycles. Engines coughed to life, but they did not rev them in defiance. They rolled their bikes away slowly, like men ashamed of being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The leader's arm sagged, his hand falling uselessly to his side, but his pride would not surrender. His face twisted in fury, desperate to claw back the control slipping through his fingers. He spat into the dirt and barked, "You think a song makes you a man? You think words make you stronger than me? That's a trick for crowds, not here. Not with us." But even as he spoke, his voice betrayed him. It cracked under the strain, brittle and hollow. The farmer, still clutching his hat to his chest, dared to look up. His eyes glistened, his lips trembling with emotion he could not contain. He whispered hoarsely, as though confessing to himself more than anyone else, "Lord." He stopped him, with nothing but a song. The strangers who had begun to gather, the travelers pulling in for gas, a couple stepping out of a truck parked down the road, had already recognized him. Whispers moved like ripples through the crowd. "It's Elvis. It's really him." The realization spread, sparking awe and disbelief in equal measure. Phones and cameras didn't flash. This was an age before pocket screens captured everything. Instead, the recognition lived in gasps, in stilled breaths, in the hush of men and women realizing they were witnesses to something extraordinary. The leader spun at the sound of murmurs, his panic deepening. The circle was no longer his alone. A crowd was forming, and their eyes weren't on him. They were on the man he could not break. For the first time, he felt the sting of exposure. His power had always thrived in shadows, in fear. But here, under the gaze of strangers, he was shrinking. "You think you can shame me in front of my men?" he roared, his voice high with desperation. "You think I'll crawl because of a tune?" His hand darted to his jacket, fumbling for something more permanent, more final than fists, anything that could restore his command. But the eyes of his men no longer held the same loyalty. Some turned away, unwilling to share in what was unraveling. The song had ended, but its echo hung in the air. Not the melody itself, but the silence it left behind. It was a silence sharper than steel, a silence that revealed the absurdity of violence. Against that, even the loudest rage felt small. The farmer's shoulders shook with quiet sobs, his body bent under the weight of gratitude and relief. He stared at the man who had just risked everything, not with fists, but with a voice, and he realized he was standing in the middle of a miracle that no headline could ever capture. And all around, the watching crowd began to shift closer, as if the invisible shield the song had cast still lingered, daring them to stand on the side of the man who had turned danger into silence. The leader's rage burned brighter as the silence deepened. 2 of his own men had already left, peeling away into the dusk with the sound of retreating engines. Each disappearance hollowed him further, but he clung to fury as if it were the only weapon left. His voice cracked through the stillness, loud and raw. "You think you can stand me down with a tune? Think you're bigger than me?" His hand darted inside his jacket. When it reappeared, it carried a glint that caught what little light remained of the evening. A knife, its blade dulled by age but no less dangerous for it. Gasps rippled through the growing crowd. The farmer stiffened, breath choking in his throat. He had expected fists, perhaps another shove into the dirt, but not this. His eyes widened in terror, darting between the steel in the biker's hand and the calm figure who stood in front of him. The man in the plain shirt didn't flinch. He remained exactly where he was, his posture steady, his eyes unwavering. But even he understood the shift. Words and song had carried him this far, yet steel in a desperate hand could cut through conviction as quickly as through cloth. The leader advanced a step, brandishing the knife in a jerky arc meant less to strike and more to scare. "Let's see your song stop this," he spat. And then, the moment no one expected, the farmer, frail and beaten, moved. He stepped between them, arms spread wide, body shielding the man who had just saved him. His voice cracked, but it carried enough to be heard. "You'll go through me first." The crowd gasped louder now. Even the bikers who remained flinched. For all his weakness, all his fear, the farmer's act carried a weight none of them anticipated. The leader blinked, caught off guard. His authority relied on the submission of men like this, the ones who cowered, who bowed their heads. To see the weakest among them stand defiant unsettled him in a way no fist ever could. The man behind the farmer laid a steady hand on his shoulder, gently but firmly pulling him back. His voice was low, measured, calm enough to carry strength. "No, my friend, you don't have to carry this." He faced the leader then, eyes sharp as steel, though his tone remained even. "You take one more step, and it won't be me you're fighting. It'll be yourself. Everyone here already sees you for what you are. Do this, and you'll never escape it." The words landed like a sentence. Around them, the crowd grew louder, not shouting, not chanting, but murmuring with rising conviction. One voice rang out clear from the back. "He's right. Leave it be." Another shouted, "You're finished, man." Everyone sees it. The tide had shifted. The leader no longer stood in the shelter of fear. He stood exposed, his actions scrutinized by strangers who had nothing to lose in calling him out. The knife wavered in his hand. His grip tightened, his eyes darting from his men to the crowd, searching for any anchor of loyalty. But all he found were downcast eyes and uncertain faces. Even his most faithful companion hesitated, his boots shifting uneasily in the dirt. The farmer, tears streaking through the grime on his cheeks, whispered hoarsely to the man beside him. "You gave me the courage, but I couldn't let you stand alone." The man gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, as if to say the gesture had not been in vain. The leader let out a guttural roar, raising the knife higher, but his movements were clumsy now, fueled by desperation rather than control. He wanted to reclaim what was already gone. The man in the simple shirt didn't step back. Instead, his voice rang out again, quiet yet cutting through the noise with clarity. "This is your moment to stop. Not for me, not for them, for you." The words didn't echo. They settled, and they dug deep. The crowd's murmur swelled, a living force pressing in on the leader. He saw not fear, but judgment in every face, in every pair of eyes fixed on him. The weight crushed him more heavily than any fist could. His hand shook, the blade trembling as his own breath quickened. One of the bikers finally muttered, almost apologetic, "Boss, put it down." It was over. The knife sagged, then fell, clattering against the gravel with a dull ring that seemed to release the entire scene from its tension. The leader's knees bent slightly, as though his body had finally betrayed the pride that had carried him this far. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, not in triumph, but in a chorus of relief. The farmer collapsed to his knees, sobbing with the release of fear he had carried too long. The leader's companion grabbed him by the arm, muttering something under his breath, and began tugging him toward the motorcycles. His fury had burned out, leaving only the ashes of humiliation. And still, the man in the plain shirt remained steady, his gaze unbroken, his presence a wall that had held firm against the storm. The knife clattered onto the gravel, its metallic ring echoing longer than it should have in the thick, waiting air. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Dust swirled lazily across the road, the only sign that time was still passing. Then the crowd exhaled all at once, a collective release of breath that had been held too long. But the leader wasn't finished. Not yet. His chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, his face a mask of humiliation. The blade may have left his hand, but pride still clenched his heart like a vice. He staggered forward a step, fists balled, spitting venom. "You think this is over? You think I'm just gonna crawl away?" he shouted, voice high, stripped of its former authority. His words cracked, more desperate than defiant. Around him, the pack had thinned to almost nothing. Most of his men had slipped away quietly, unwilling to follow him into disgrace. Only one remained at his side, a loyal shadow with haunted eyes, gripping his arm as though ready to drag him back to the bikes. The rest were gone, lost not to fists, but to something deeper. The man in the plain shirt did not move. He stood rooted, calm as stone. His presence was unshaken, his silence deliberate. The crowd pressed closer now, not hostile but watchful, their murmurs growing louder. Whispers turned into open declarations. "He's finished. Don't let him touch you, Elvis. We've got your back." Everybody sees him for what he is now. The leader's face twitched at the sound of the name, the truth exposed in full. His last refuge, anonymity, had been stripped away. The man he had mocked, shoved against, threatened with steel, was not just another traveler. He was the most recognizable voice of their generation, standing unguarded before him. And he had been undone not by fists, but by a song and the moral weight of presence. The stranger finally spoke, his words sharp in their softness. "I don't hate you," he said quietly. "I pity you, because no matter where you go, you'll still carry yourself with you. And that's the fight you'll never win." The sentence cut deeper than any knife. The leader staggered back as if struck, his face collapsing into a snarl. He turned to his remaining companion, shouting accusations, his voice cracking into madness. "You left me out here to rot. All of you! Cowards!" His scream bounced off the gas station walls, a hollow sound without power. The companion tugged at him again, whispering urgently, "It's done. We have to go." The leader's shoulders slumped, fury crumbling into a mess of shame. His eyes darted across the faces in the crowd, searching for one trace of respect, one shred of loyalty. He found none. Only judgment, only disappointment. He was stripped bare in front of strangers and men he had once commanded. He let out one last roar, guttural and broken, then bent to snatch up the knife, only to stop halfway. The futility of it struck him at last. His hand hung in the air, trembling, before dropping uselessly to his side. His companion pushed him toward the bikes. They stumbled together, the once fearsome leader now dragged like a sulking child, his authority shattered beyond repair. The crowd parted to let them through, not out of fear, but because no one wanted to touch the carcass of pride that had just been slain. Engines sputtered to life. The two riders mounted and rolled away, the roar of their Harleys swallowed by the dust of the road. There was no triumph in their departure, only a lingering shame that clung like smoke. Silence filled the space they left behind. Then, slowly, the sound of clapping began. It wasn't raucous, not the thunder of a concert hall. It was steady, deliberate, respectful. A woman in the crowd wiped her eyes. A man raised his hat in quiet salute. The farmer, still trembling, turned to the figure beside him. His lips quivered, his voice breaking. "You saved me. Lord knows you saved me." The man placed a hand on his shoulder, his touch grounding. "You stood up too," he replied gently. "Don't forget that." The farmer shook his head, tears cutting clean lines down his dirt-streaked face. "I thought I was done for. And then you stopped him without ever raising a hand. I've never seen anything like it." The stranger's eyes softened. "Sometimes the hardest punch is the one you don't throw." The crowd stirred again, voices overlapping, some in awe, others simply repeating the truth they had witnessed. He faced him down, with nothing but words, with a song. In the middle of it all, the man remained still. No grin, no basking in adoration. His face carried a weariness, as if the weight of what had just happened pressed on him heavier than applause could lift. But the victory was undeniable. The gang was broken. The leader was finished. And a truth had been laid bare before every witness. There are kinds of power that outlast fists, knives, even fear itself. And standing in the middle of the fading light, the man who had carried that truth looked less like a star and more like what he truly was, simply human and unyielding. The roar of engines faded into the distance, leaving only the settling dust and the murmurs of the crowd. What remained at the gas station was not the chaos of violence, but the strange quiet that follows it, the hush that feels like the air itself is trying to recover. The farmer stayed on his knees, shoulders heaving, his chest rising and falling with the release of tension that had threatened to suffocate him. Slowly, with effort, he pushed himself upright. His clothes were smeared with dirt, his face streaked with sweat and tears, but his eyes glistened with something deeper than pain. Relief mixed with disbelief. He turned toward the man who had stood beside him. For a long moment, words failed. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally managed a broken whisper. "I thought no one would ever stand for me. I thought I was on my own forever." The man's expression softened. He laid a steady hand on the farmer's shoulder, grounding him with a touch both firm and gentle. Sometimes all it takes is one step, one person willing to stand, and the world looks different. The farmer's lip trembled, his head bowing under the weight of gratitude he could not express. Tears came freely now, streaking through the dust. He pressed his hat against his chest, as though it were the only thing keeping him from falling apart entirely. Around them, the crowd had grown, drawn by whispers and recognition. Some stared in awe, their eyes fixed on the man in the simple shirt, realizing they were standing a few feet from the most famous voice of their time. A few tried to edge closer, hands twitching as though ready to ask for autographs, to capture the moment, to tell their friends they had been there. But the man raised a hand, not sharp, not commanding, but firm enough to carry meaning. "Leave him be," he said quietly, nodding toward the farmer. "This isn't his to share with the world. Let him walk away in peace." The authority in his tone settled the crowd. They understood, even if reluctantly. Cameras stayed in bags, pens in pockets. Instead, the witnesses gave the farmer the dignity of privacy, turning their attention elsewhere. The farmer's breath steadied. He nodded once, wordless, as though that single gesture contained all the thanks his voice could not carry. And then came a softer step. The young biker, the one whose voice had cracked first, who had spoken against his leader, emerged from the edge of the crowd. His jacket hung heavy on his narrow shoulders, suddenly ill-fitting, like a costume he no longer wanted to wear. His eyes darted nervously, avoiding both the stranger's gaze and the farmer's. Finally, he swallowed and spoke, his voice low, but carrying enough to be heard. You changed something in me tonight." The man tilted his head slightly, studying him. The boy's voice shook, but the words were real. "I don't want to be part of that anymore. I thought I needed them. I thought it made me strong. But standing there, watching you, I saw it. That ain't strength." For a moment, the boy's face crumpled, shame washing over him. He lowered his eyes to the dirt, his words barely more than a whisper. "I don't know who I am without them." The man stepped closer, closing the gap between them with deliberate calm. He didn't scold, didn't offer hollow comfort. Instead, he spoke in a way that cut through the noise of confusion and went straight to the boy's core. "The only lie you can't survive is the one you tell yourself. Don't live it. Don't be it. Find the truth and stand in it, even if it's only you. The boy's throat worked, his jaw tight as he fought against the emotion rising in him. Finally, he nodded, quick, almost desperate. I'll try. I swear, I'll try. The man gave him the faintest nod in return. Then you're already further along than you were an hour ago. The farmer, watching, let out a shaky laugh through his tears, the sound as fragile as it was genuine. 2 men saved tonight. One older, one younger. The boy looked at the farmer, shame flickering in his eyes, but the farmer shook his head, refusing to let blame linger. Don't run from who you were. Just don't let it chain you anymore. The crowd murmured again, softer now, not as spectators hungry for spectacle, but as witnesses to something they understood was rare. What they had seen was not a performance, not the glittering showmanship they might have expected from a star. It was raw humanity, quiet, steady, and profoundly unshakable. The man in the simple shirt looked from the farmer to the boy, then to the crowd. For a moment, his eyes carried a weariness that suggested he wanted none of this attention, none of the stories that would surely spread by morning. But he accepted it with grace. He offered no speeches, no declarations, only a quiet presence that spoke louder than words. The farmer wiped his face, shoulders slowly straightening as though some of his dignity had been restored. The boy lingered nearby, uncertain but determined, clutching at the new path he had promised to find. And the man, standing at the center of it all, let the silence rest. The night deepened as the last of the crowd began to drift away. Tires crunched on gravel, boots scuffed against the roadside, voices faded into the darkness until only the cicadas and the low hum of the neon sign remained. The storm of confrontation had passed, leaving behind a strange, sacred calm. The man in the plain shirt stood by his Cadillac, one hand resting on the roof, the other dangling at his side. He didn't climb in right away. He lingered, staring at the dark ribbon of highway that stretched endlessly into the horizon. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between exhaustion and contemplation. The farmer approached slowly, as though afraid the moment would vanish if he moved too quickly. He still carried dust on his clothes and bruises blooming along his jaw, but his posture had changed. He was upright now, his shoulders squared not with bravado, but with dignity reclaimed. He stopped a few feet away, clutching something in his hand. His voice was rough, broken from the strain of the night, but steady enough to carry. I ain't got much, never did, but I can't let you leave without giving you something back. He extended his palm. Resting there was a small, worn token, a brass military tag, edges dulled, numbers and letters faded from years of wear. It caught the faint neon light, glinting weakly, but carrying a weight no gold could rival. This kept me alive once, the farmer whispered. I carried it through the war, held it in my pocket when the bullets came close. I swore it had luck in it. Tonight, you saved me again, so it belongs to you now. For a moment, the man said nothing. He reached out, took the tag gently, and held it in his palm. The metal was warm from the farmer's hand, scarred by history, infused with the silent weight of sacrifice. He closed his fist around it, feeling its edges press into his skin. Then he looked at the farmer and shook his head. His voice was quiet but firm, carrying more than simple words. You keep it. It's been with you through more than I can know. You'll need it again before I ever will. The farmer's lip quivered, his eyes burning. But you? The man cut him off softly, pressing the tag back into his hand and curling the farmer's fingers around it. I already have what I need. Tonight proved that. The farmer swallowed hard, nodding slowly. He slipped the tag back into his pocket, his hand lingering there as though it had grown heavier, more precious for having been offered and refused. Tears welled again, but this time they weren't born of despair. They carried something lighter, closer to gratitude. The man opened the Cadillac door and slid inside. For a moment, he didn't start the engine. He simply sat, hands resting on the wheel, eyes fixed on the endless road ahead. Outside, the farmer remained rooted in place, watching silently as though afraid to blink and lose the vision of the man who had stood for him. At last, the engine rumbled to life, deep and steady. The headlights cut a pale path through the dust, illuminating the stretch of highway waiting to carry him away. As the car rolled forward, the farmer lifted his hand in a slow, wordless salute. The man inside didn't wave, didn't smile. He only inclined his head slightly, a gesture small but rich with meaning. The Cadillac moved past the edge of the filling station, swallowed by the dark. The glow of the taillights faded until only night remained. Inside the car, the man reached forward and flicked on the radio. Static crackled, then gave way to a familiar sound. His own voice, recorded years earlier, singing of hope, of dreams, of a world better than the one at hand. If I Can Dream filled the cabin, not as a performance, but as a reminder of what could be, of what must be carried forward. He let the words wash over him, eyes half closing for a moment as the rhythm of the road and the hum of the song blended into one. His hand tightened briefly on the wheel, then relaxed again. There was no applause now, no spotlights, no stage. Only the dark highway stretching ahead, the hum of an engine, and the quiet knowledge that tonight had mattered in ways no headline would ever capture. The man drove on, leaving behind nothing but silence, dust, and a memory etched into the hearts of those who had seen him stand unshaken. For the farmer, for the boy, for the crowd, it would remain the night when a song stilled violence, when conviction outshone fear, when humanity wore no crown yet stood taller than any king. And for the man behind the wheel, it was simply another road, another night, another reminder of why he could never turn away when injustice stood too close. The highway swallowed the Cadillac, and the silence returned, final, unbroken, and deeper than any applause.